Genre: folk tale. Essential question: what behaviors help to create a strong community? The Stranger and the Soup. Retold by Elizabeth Hamilton. Illustrated by Joanne Renaud. At first, the stranger looked like a tiny dark spot against the faraway sky. Isabel watched the spot from her window. As it moved closer, she could see that it was indeed a man. He was dressed in a long cape with a hood and carried a walking stick. He moved slowly but surely down the road that led to Isabel's village. "Maman," she shouted, "you will not believe this. I think we have a visitor." Isabel's mother dropped her sewing and hurried to the window. She let out a gasp of surprise. Few people ever came to the village during this dark time. The driest year that anyone could remember was coming to an end. Olive trees had turned brown. Vegetables had wilted. The farmers' wheat and barley fields had almost died. Isabel's neighbors now spent their days wringing their hands with worry. Would they go hungry this winter? Suddenly, the stranger stopped right in front of Isabel's gate. As he turned, she could see his tired eyes and dusty beard. He had been walking that road for quite a while. "Oh no," Isabel's mother said. "He's going to ask us for food." And sure enough, the stranger gave a knock at Isabel's door. Her mother opened it just wide enough to stick out her head. "What is the meaning of this?" she asked. "I am so sorry to trouble you, good lady," replied the stranger. "But could you spare any food? I have not eaten in 2 days, and I have many miles to go." Isabel's mother frowned at the man. "We have nada, nothing to spare. We barely have enough to feed ourselves. Nature has not been kind to us." The stranger said nothing more. He only nodded his head, turned, and made his way to the next house. Isabel's mother shook her head. "He will hear the same thing at every house," she said. "How can anyone spare a crumb with winter before us after such a hard summer?" "But Mama, shouldn't we always try to help someone in need?" said Isabel. "Goodness, child, don't bother me with your questions," her mother replied. "Besides, things are different now. We must look out for ourselves." Isabel returned to the window. As she watched the man ask at door after door, she saw that her mother was right. No one would share even a crust of bread. "Don't you see our pitiful gardens and fields?" Senor Vargas said next door. "How can you expect us to help you?" Senora Costa, who lived 5 houses away, was even more unkind. "Get out of here!" Isabel heard her shout. The stranger never became angry. He never raised his voice. He quietly asked for food and nodded humbly when each neighbor refused to give it. Isabel wondered what would become of him. Soon he reached the end of the road. Would he move on to the next village? Isabel had to find out. She followed the stranger to the plaza, or town square. The stranger sat down on a bench and put down his walking stick. He pulled something small and round from his pocket. It was a stone. Just then, the stranger looked up and saw Isabel. "Hello, little girl," he said with a smile. "I was just about to make some soup." "But no one would give you a bit of food," Isabel replied. "What will you make it with?" "All I need is this special stone," the stranger said. He held up the smooth gray thing for Isabel to see. "Well, I'll need a large pot and a spoon, too. Do you know where I might borrow them?" "My mother has an extra pot and spoon," Isabel replied. "I'll go and get them." And before the stranger could say stone soup, she hurried home. Senor Vargas saw Isabel dragging her mother's old cooking pot down the road. "Isabel, what on earth are you doing?" he called. "The stranger is going to make soup with only a special stone," Isabel replied. "I'm lending him Mama's old pot." "How can it be?" Senor Vargas said. "No one can make soup with a stone. Do not be fooled, child." "It is a very special stone," Isabel said, "and I want to help the stranger if I can." Senor Vargas shook his head and sighed. He found himself curious, though, about the stranger and his amazing stone. He followed Isabel to the plaza. The stranger had already gathered some wood and started a fire. He took Isabel's pot and filled it with water from the well. He placed the pot on the fire, and in a few minutes, the water began to simmer. Then he took out the small stone and, plunk, threw it in the water. "Ah," the stranger said as he sniffed the air, "this soup smells good already, but it could be better." Senor Vargas came closer. He could smell nothing but the smoke from the fire. Other villagers had gathered in a circle around the pot. They too wanted to see the special stone do its work. The stranger continued, "Yes, this soup could be better. An onion would make it so." "I can find you one," Isabel cried. She ran back to her little garden, dug up a small onion, and brought it to the plaza. When Isabel returned to the plaza, more people had gathered to see the stranger make his soup. She proudly gave him the onion. He smiled his thanks, sliced the onion with a knife from his pocket, and threw it into the pot. When the others saw the little girl share, they did not want to be outdone. "I bet just a carrot or two would be tasty in that soup," said Senor Vargas. "Let me fetch you some." "I can bring you a cabbage," shouted Isabel's friend Marco, who had just joined the crowd. Would a bit of garlic, perhaps improve the soup as well?" asked Senor Alves, the shyest man in the village. Senor Alves almost never said a word, but he had been caught up in the thrill of the moment. The stranger nodded, and off he went to find the garlic. "Wait just a minute," yelled Senora Silva, the best cook in the village. "A soup without salt and pepper is like a song without a melody. You must have some seasoning, don't you know? Let me get you some." She ran to her cottage to get the spices. One by one, the villagers added their gifts to the pot. The stranger just smiled and kept stirring the soup. Soon the most wonderful smell drifted through the air. More and more people followed their noses to the plaza. They stood on tiptoes to see over the crowd. Had this stranger really made a most delicious soup from a stone? It seemed that he had. Suddenly, the stranger stood up and cleared his throat. "Good people," he shouted. "I hope you do not expect me to eat all this soup alone. Please help yourselves." The villagers left the plaza and returned with bowls and spoons. They brought tables and chairs and placed them side by side. They brought jugs of water and milk. Some even brought loaves of bread. Isabel brought her mother, who found that she could spare a little sausage after all. Senora Costa brought a block of goat's milk cheese. Before the villagers knew it, they had a feast before them. They laughed as they passed around the pot of stone soup, the bread, and the other foods. A feeling they hadn't felt in a very long time came over them. It was happiness. With their bellies warm and full of soup, they forgot to worry about the winter. Life had been so hard that they had stopped talking with each other. Now they chatted and joked like the best of friends. The villagers talked with the stranger as well. Isabel sat beside him and stared up at him in wonder. How could the stranger make so much with so little? How could he share with the very people who would not share with him? As the last bowls were scraped clean and the last crusts of bread were eaten, the stranger stood up to leave. "Please don't go," cried the villagers. "I must leave, for I have many miles to travel," said the stranger. "But I will leave you my special stone. I hope you will make many more pots of soup like this one." The stranger picked up his walking stick and began to make his way down the long, dusty road. Isabel's mother turned to her and said, "What a good, kind man. And just think, he gave us his special stone. We do not deserve it." The villagers decided to give the stone to Senora Silva for safekeeping. They agreed that they would meet in the plaza once a week to make stone soup. Every person would bring what he or she could spare: a potato, a turnip, spices, some meat. In the end, they would have a delicious meal to share. The winter was a hard one. Each family in the village had very little food. But they looked forward to their stone soup every week. It kept them going. It reminded them to look after each other. When the winter was over, spring rains came again. Gardens and fields were green with life. The villagers had all lived to see better days ahead. "Thank goodness for the stranger's special stone," they said. "It alone has saved us." Isabel smiled to herself when she heard this. Was she the only one who could see it? The stone was just a stone. The way her village had come together, that was truly special.